"Honey, what's wrong? What's wrong?" Carolyn Carr asked her daughter as Missy burst into her parents' home. She hugged her sobbing daughter, patting her on the back with one hand and stroking her head with the other. "Ben's gone!" Missy screamed. "He sent this to me at work!" she exclaimed, pulling away from her mother before shoving the envelope into her father's hands. Carolyn hugged her daughter and pulled her to her chest. Frank Carr took the envelope. Before opening it, he asked Missy, "Where's Benjamin? Is he at Ben's?" In her condition, Missy shouldn't be driving with a small child. "Yes," Missy exhaled between sobs and tears. Earlier that day, Ben had taken Kevin, their youngest son, to Frank and Carolyn's house and asked them to watch Kevin since he had some business with Benjamin. Not 2 hours later, Missy called her parents nearly hysterical after being served with divorce papers at work. She arrived at her parents' house in tears. Frank sat in a chair while his wife and daughter collapsed into each other's arms on the couch. Carolyn stroked her daughter's hair as she cried on her mother's chest. Frank pulled the papers out of the envelope and read the divorce petition on the first page. He shook his head grimly as he read the document. There was no notice or discussion between his soon-to-be ex-son-in-law and Missy. The asshole had served her at work without giving her advance notice, resulting in great shock, upset, and humiliation. When Frank read the document, he looked up puzzled. "Missy, he's filing on the grounds that you cheated on him." "You cheated on him?" "No! He got it into his head that I was having an affair with a friend at work. That's not true. I never cheated on Ben. I love him!" Missy uttered the last phrase with a cry that sounded like a wounded animal howling. "I'm going to nail his ass to my office wall," Frank thought to himself. "Making up stupid accusations to defame Missy and get a divorce. Son of a bitch probably cheated on her." As he continued reading the divorce petition, Frank felt his left eyebrow rise, a sure sign of displeasure. "Missy, why would Ben think you were cheating on him?" Missy looked angrily at her father and then looked pleadingly at her mother. "I don't know. Maybe I hugged one of our salesmen when he made a big sale." The statement sounded like a question, as Missy tried to figure out what her husband might have seen and interpreted accordingly. Was that all it was? An innocent hug with a co-worker? Missy continued to stare irritably at her father. "He kissed me at a happy hour after work. I had too much to drink, and as soon as I came to my senses, I pushed him away. But that's all that happened, I swear." As Frank continued to read, his eyebrow continued to rise to his forehead, which did not go unnoticed by his wife. "What's your point, Frank?" Carolyn asked with irritation in her voice. "Are you accusing your daughter of something?" "No, or at least not yet. But we've known Ben for what? 7 or 8 years? I work with him every day. This is totally unlike him, so I'm trying to figure out what's on his mind." "In his own ass," Carolyn snapped at Frank as she continued to comfort Missy. She brought Missy a box of tissues, and a pile of used tissues was growing on the coffee table in front of Missy. "How can you even think about taking his side after what he did to our daughter?" "I'm not taking sides until I finish reading this petition," Frank said. "Who is he accusing you of cheating with?" Frank asked his daughter. "And why does he think it was an affair and not an innocent hug and drunken kiss?" Missy pulled away from her mother and wiped her face with a tissue. "He thinks I had an affair with Andy Hebert, one of our sales reps. But I didn't. He must have seen something and misunderstood." Frank nodded his head slowly. "And what could he have seen?" Missy cried again. Frank's facial expression slowly changed from understanding and sympathetic to what his wife called a stony expression as he continued to read the documents. "Ben is requesting a 50-50 split of custody of Benjamin, naming himself as the custodial parent." Frank looked at his daughter with a grim expression. "He is not asking for custody of or visitation with the minor known as Kevin Andrew Davis. He is also asking that his name be removed from the birth certificate of the minor Kevin Andrew Davis, and that Kevin's last name be changed." Carolyn and Missy both aghast at this revelation. Missy threw herself into her mother's arms and began sobbing and wailing. "Missy? Missy, look at me!" Frank said loudly, blocking out the screams. Missy stopped crying and looked at her father. Carolyn Carr looked at her husband worriedly at his lack of sympathy for his daughter. Ben accuses you of cheating on him with Andy Hebert. Kevin's middle name is Andrew because you said you always liked that name. I ask you again, did you cheat on Ben with this Andy guy? In response, Missy let out a loud shriek and began sobbing loudly in her mom's arms. Carolyn looked at her husband in anger. "Can you please stop this?" she hissed. "Did you know?" Frank asked his wife with a stone face. "What was it exactly?" Frank could see the rage boiling in his wife's eyes. Frank picked up the piece of paper. "This is why Ben is not asking for any share of custody of Kevin. This is a DNA test that shows that the probability that Ben is Kevin's father is less than 0.0002%. So tell me, Carolyn, how long have you known about this?" After almost 30 years of marriage, Carolyn knew her husband better than he knew himself. She realized that the marriage was on the precipice of an abyss. If she had admitted to her husband that Missy had told her that she wasn't sure who the baby's father was, then Frank might well have divorced her. However, if she lied and Frank found out she lied, then her marriage is definitely over. But only if he found out. Carolyn shook her head and rolled the dice. "I didn't know. This is the first time I've heard it. I think Missy is as shocked as we are." "I doubt that," Frank said dryly. "But there is one way to reassure me. I want to see both of your cell phones." Carolyn stood up suddenly and pointed her finger angrily at her husband. "You're not going to invade our privacy," she said like a cutoff. "You're not going through our phones." Frank looked at his wife and nodded slowly. "They say people who have nothing to hide don't hide anything. I assume you have something to hide, so let me explain it to you very clearly so that you don't have a chance to make a mistake or misunderstand what I'm saying. Either you both unlock your phones and give them to me right now, or I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." Carolyn looked at her husband with eyes squinted with rage. "I've never given you a reason not to trust me. We're not giving up our cell phones, and we're not getting a divorce." Frank looked at his wife glumly. "I've caught you in a lot of little deceptions over the years. I always let it go because I figured the argument we'd have over the lies wouldn't be worth the hassle. I'm ashamed of what I've allowed you to do all these years. I think the lies were to cover up the cheating. I wouldn't have thought of it until today, but now. To see a daughter trying to fool her husband into raising someone else's child? To hell with the noise. The blinders are off. It's your phones or divorce. And if any of you think I'm bluffing, try and find out." This was a side of Frank that neither Carolyn nor Missy had ever seen. A grim determination that could not be compromised. "Fuck you!" Carolyn shouted with a vicious grin. "I'll clean you out in the divorce. I'll take everything you own, and you'll be lucky if you get to live in your car." Frank rose from his chair, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. He looked at his wife and daughter and shook his head, heading for the kitchen. A minute later, he returned, carrying a plastic Ziploc bag. He twisted the bag in the palm of his hand and, using it like a glove, picked up the handful of used napkins lying in front of Missy. He flipped the bag back to its usual position, placing the wipes inside, and then closed the zipper, pinching it between his thumb and forefinger. "What are you doing?" Carolyn's voice turned to a scream. She was shaking with barely contained anger as she pointed to the bag of used tissues. In nearly 30 years of marriage, Frank had never once confronted this aspect of her personality. He was beginning to wonder if he even knew his wife. "I'm going to find out from Ben who he used for DNA testing to find out that Kevin wasn't his son. Well, and I'm going to find out if Missy is my daughter or if you've been lying to me for almost 30 years. Carolyn shrieked and lunged at Frank, digging her nails into his face. "If it hasn't happened to you, it's hard to describe the effect of having the spirit knocked out of you. It's such an oft-uttered phrase, but most people have never actually experienced it. Breath deprivation causes panic because the air is instantly forced out of your lungs when they deflate. Not being able to breathe or get even a little bit of air into yourself instills terror because it feels like you are about to die. The seconds it takes for your lungs to fill with air again seem like minutes as your body struggles to breathe." Frank practiced karate for 6 years in his youth, and even though that was 40 years ago, some things are never forgotten. As his wife's fingernails dug into his face, Frank delivered a palm strike to the top of Carolyn's solar plexus. The blow wasn't hard. In fact, Frank knew it would leave minimal, if any, bruising. But what it did do was knock all the air out of Carolyn's lungs, leaving her rolling around on the floor, gulping air with her mouth in terror and unable to breathe. This caused Carolyn to panic, which in turn caused Missy to panic as her mother grabbed her throat and tried to breathe. While his wife rolled around on the floor, Frank quickly headed to the back of the house where his home office was located. He knew that in about a minute, Carolyn would start breathing normally again, and he wanted to get out of the house as soon as possible. Frank grabbed his MacBook Air and his iPad, quickly logged into their Wi-Fi router and changed the password to the router. Carolyn could use her phone to access the internet, but she never did anything on her phone except scroll through Facebook or Reddit. Any banking or credit card transactions she couldn't do from her computer without Wi-Fi. Frank quickly threw a couple changes of clothes into his backpack and walked out of the house, passing his wife, who sat breathing deeply, and said goodbye to 30 years of a seemingly happy marriage. Frank left quickly until he reached the nearest McDonald's, where he used their Wi-Fi system to enter Safari. Frank logged into American Express, paid and closed their joint Amex Gold card. Frank then logged into Chase, paid off and closed their joint Chase credit card before logging into Chase Bill Pay and writing a check to himself, taking care of the landscape company he owned for half of the remaining balance on their joint account. Frank had long ago registered his company as a payee. "Frank," Adam Davis said in an even tone, devoid of intonation. "Hi, Adam," Frank said to his daughter's soon-to-be ex-father-in-law. "It's a hell of a situation, isn't it?" "It couldn't be worse," Adam said as he opened the door for Frank. "Let's go out on the patio and watch the golfers." "Bourbon?" The Davis house was on a cul-de-sac adjacent to the golf course of the country club of which both families were members. Adam's wife had won the club's women's championship for the past 4 years, something Adam was extremely proud of. Seated on the Davis patio with a bourbon in his hand, Frank began the conversation. "How's Ben doing?" Adam tilted his head toward Frank as if to ask, "Really?" "I know, stupid question. What he's going through is hardly the worst thing a man can go through. I'd say with the exception of losing a child, but that's exactly what he's going through, isn't it? He's losing his youngest son, and you're losing your youngest grandson. How could Missy do that to him? What happened to that girl?" Frank sighed and shook his head. "She was always spoiled, and instead of insisting on her own way, I just turned a blind eye to it. I guess that makes it as much my fault as anyone else's." Adam shrugged. "Maybe, but probably not. She's a grown woman, quite capable of making her own decisions and taking responsibility for her actions." Frank nodded his head in agreement before taking a sip of bourbon. "Where is Ben hiding? I assume Benjamin is with him?" "They're at the lake house. He doesn't want to see Missy or talk to her, and the 4-year-old is too young to see his mom having a nervous breakdown. It's a good thing Kevin isn't even a year old yet. He won't remember Ben. Can't say the same for Ben, though. He was so happy to have 2 little boys." Frank shook his head sadly with tears in his eyes. "I understand. I don't want to see her either, or her mother. Turns out my sweet, loving wife knew all along that there was a chance Ben wasn't the boy's father and didn't tell me a damn thing about it. Now I suspect I'm not Missy's father, and I've abandoned Carolyn." "Good God," Adam said, exhaling slowly. "Just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, you said, 'Hold my beer.'" Frank raised his glass to Adam in silent acknowledgement. Adam said, "As pissed off as I am, you should see Babe. She scares the shit out of me." Babe Davis had been Adam's wife for 32 years. The daughter of a rancher and a gifted athlete throughout high school and college, she was named in honor of world-renowned athlete and Port Arthur, Texas, native Babe Diedrickson Zacharias. Like this little girl, Babe Davis, nee Landry, excelled in tennis and golf in high school and college. Babe even spent a year playing against pros as an amateur in LPGA tournaments before becoming pregnant with Ben. If Missy wasn't Benjamin's mother, I seriously think she would have shot Missy. I've never seen her so angry," Adam continued. Frank shook his head. "Keep her in line. I don't want her to get in trouble over those 2 whores. It's bad enough that I'm probably going to jail." "You? Jail? What the hell, Frank? Does this have anything to do with the Band-Aids on your face?" Frank stopped by CVS to buy some Neosporin and a face patch before driving up to Adam and Babe's house. Frank nodded his head as he told Adam the story of grabbing Missy's used wipes for DNA testing and Carolyn's subsequent attack on him before he punched her in the stomach. "Jesus Christ, Frank!" Adam looked at Frank with respect. "Normally, I wouldn't agree to punch a woman, but damn if there was ever anyone so deserving of a good kick in the ass." "I did, but I know these two are going to make up another story, so I figure I'm going to get arrested soon. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Could you contact Ben and let him know he's going to have to handle this on his own for a while? His son-in-law not only worked for Frank's landscaping company, but he bought 25% of the business." "Of course he did. He has a disposable cell phone, and I'll make sure to give you his number." Their conversation was interrupted when Babe, Adam's wife, walked through the kitchen and into the office. She looked coldly at Frank, and keeping her eyes on her visitor, asked her husband, "What is he doing here? And why are the police pulling into the driveway now?" "Relax, honey. Frank is on Ben's side in all of this. Turns out Carolyn knew all about Missy's affair and that Kevin might not be Ben's son." Frank left home. Whatever Adam was going to say next was interrupted by the front doorbell ringing. Babe opened the door to the police officers and turned to Frank, who nodded his head at their question. "I figured this would happen," he said as he walked to the door to greet the officers, who quickly had him turn around and submit to being handcuffed. The officers sat Frank down and asked him to give his version of events. When he described Carolyn's attack on him and his defensive actions by showing them the scratches on his face, the officers were sympathetic but indifferent. "If you had called us right then, they probably would have arrested her instead of you." "I'll have Ben get your lawyer involved," Adam said. Babe hugged Frank as the police let him out. 6 months passed, and the storm of resentment had mostly subsided. Missy fought Ben on the divorce, first demanding counseling and then, when it was denied, imposing very onerous conditions. DNA testing revealed that Missy was Frank's daughter, resulting in very mixed feelings from him. He had always loved Missy because she was his daughter. However, he had no respect for her. They had very little contact with each other, and Frank did not expect that to change anytime soon. She denied him any contact with his grandson, Kevin. Based on a photograph of Frank taken at a drugstore that clearly showed fingernail marks and scratches on his face, Frank was found not guilty of a Class C misdemeanor assault on his wife. Frank was divorcing Carolyn. He didn't trust or respect her. She was fighting the divorce too, and her attorneys erected roadblock after roadblock, and would have continued to do so had Carolyn and Missy not been robbed in the parking lot of a nightclub they attended together. Although they were unable to describe their attacker, cameras in the parking lot captured a small man dressed all in black and wearing a ski mask who, waving something that looked like a thin, weighted stick, mercilessly attacked the two women. The footage showed the two women being beaten with a steel bar until the bar bent and deformed. From their hospital beds, the couple claimed that they had no idea who attacked them, and that the only person who had a motive was Missy's husband, who was trying to divorce her. But given his 6'3" height, Ben Davis was ruled out as a suspect. Although there was an open investigation into the attack, there were no leads or suspects. The two women, although seriously injured with several broken bones and knocked out teeth, were not permanently damaged. Carolyn and Missy stopped going out to nightclubs and, as their paranoia about further attacks grew, spent most of their time at home annoying each other. They allowed their divorce to proceed unimpeded. Custody of Benjamin was decided on a 50-50th split, with Ben as custodial parent. Neither Ben nor Missy was awarded child support or spousal support. Ben's name was stricken from Kevin's birth certificate, and court-ordered DNA testing revealed that Andrew Hebert was Kevin's father. Andy was ordered to pay child support to Missy. Andy's wife filed for divorce, and Andy was ordered to pay child support for their 3 children, plus court-ordered spousal support for her, because at Andy's insistence, his wife had been a homemaker since the birth of their first child. This effectively drove Andy into a state of poverty from which he is unlikely to ever recover. Thanks to the support and love of his parents, Ben was able to weather the shitstorm his unfaithful wife had caused. He continued to work for Frank and continued to invest in the landscape business. His son, Benjamin, was healthy and happy, except when he had to stay with his mother at Carolyn's house. These visits saddened him because his mother seemed to be either angry with his father or inconsolably crying because she missed him. His grandmother seemed to be in a constant state of rage directed against his grandfather. The fact that Frank was a much sought-after partner for the single women at their country club added fuel to the fire raging inside Carolyn. Adam and Babe continued to support their son and grandson when needed. Babe won the women's golf championship for the 5th year in a row, even though her set of golf clubs was missing a few. What's your opinion about OP? Thanks for joining us in our stories where revenge is served hot. Please consider subscribing to our channel to ensure your next chef remains loyal. Tune in for the next one to get your revenge appetite fulfilled. If you're below 18, hold on, it's not for the faint-hearted.